There's dark comedy, there's historical movies, and then there's the Death of Stalin. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so this picture was not on my must-see list, partly because of my prejudice against movies made by big cinema and in the English language, and partly because, as a rule, movies made about the Soviet Union by people who didn't live through it tend to be trash, especially if they try to make it as comedy. But then the Russian Ministry of Culture got pissed off about the movie, like the special snowflakes that the Russian authorities have become lately under the progressive Putin, so I decided to give it a try, even if only for the Streisand effect purposes. And boy, I was wrong, like severely wrong. The movie was great. So, first of all, if you want historical accuracy, you're at the right movie. There are a few intentional changes to make the story more palatable to normies and also to create more opportunity for comedy, but overall, the picture is remarkably accurate. Even the little details like Leventi Beria giving flowers to women after raping them. Yes, really. Speaking of Leventi Beria, Simon Russell Beale provides in this picture by far the best representation of Lavrenti Pavlovich Beria that I have seen, and I have seen at least 4 other artistic depictions of this particular Soviet monster. But Simon Russell Beale, in my opinion, does by far the best job at depicting Beria the way people who met Beria described him. A chicken shit who ended up having a lot of power that he abused mercilessly and then cried like the chicken shit he was when consequences for those abuses were bestowed upon him. Anyway, so there are a few things in the picture that are inaccurate. The execution of Beria is depicted correctly, but his trial is not. For all intents and purposes, the depiction of Beria's trial in The Death of Stalin is wrong on all levels. Also, the role of Georgy Malenkov immediately after Stalin's death is exaggerated. While it is indeed true that Malenkov, Beria, and Vyacheslav Molotov formed the so-called Troika. Gee, where have we heard that term in recent history? Anyway, so while Beria, Molotov, and Malenkov formed the Troika that ruled the Soviet Union until Nikita Khrushchev took over, it is definitely not true that Malenkov was calling the shots as it is suggested in the picture. There are also some minor writing mistakes, such as when Svetlana Alliluyeva, that was Stalin's daughter, mentions her vast number of acquaintances who happen to be doctors in Stalingrad. Now that has to be wrong since Alliluyeva has never been to Stalingrad. Also, the implication that there were no doctors available for Stalin because they had all been killed or sent to the Gulag in connection to the doctor's plot is simply false. All those accused in the doctor's plot lived quite long lives after Stalin's death. Nevertheless, despite these inconsistencies, overall the level of historical accuracy is indeed impressive. Oftentimes down to details that only loons like me, who spent decades studying this criminal organization, would even know. This criminal organization oftentimes known as the Soviet government. Moreover, the dark comedy style chosen by Armando Iannucci, while indeed offensive for those nostalgic after the Soviet days and running for a position in the next free helicopter ride, that style is exactly what was needed, because the internal machinations and power struggles in the Central Committee are depicted impeccably. That's exactly how the committee used to work, like the committee of the mafia. only with power of tens of millions of people, power over tens of millions of people, rather than some shipments of cocaine. So, very, very big thumbs up for that. Alright. So the picture starts a few days before Stalin's death and does a very good job at depicting the lives of everyone under Stalin. It does a particularly good job at showing that even the members of the Politburo were living in terror, even as they were having private parties with Joseph Stalin himself. The scene where Molotov tells his wife to write down all the jokes he told Stalin and which of them amused Stalin and which didn't is emblematic to how even the closest people to Stalin were actually living under Stalin. In any event, if you know the history, even in broad terms, there are no spoilers to give since, as I said, the picture is remarkably accurate from a historical standpoint.
All those in favor? Carried unanimously.
Filming. A little bit about that. Now, although, in theory, the action does take place in Moscow, 0% of the filming took place in Moscow. Should you choose to watch the film, you will recognize the decor from my older videos, as they are all from Kyiv, Ukraine. Heck, there are a few scenes filmed in the backyard of a building in which I personally lived for a few weeks. And the Reshchetik Boulevard cannot be mistaken with all the efforts the editors made to make it look like the Bolshaya Nikitskaya Ulitsa that leads to Kremlin in Moscow. Nevertheless, big points for accuracy because the footage from Kyiv is of the relevant buildings, namely the former NKVD building, and the apartment building is one that was indeed built for the influential members of the Soviet apparatus to live in. And when they actually needed footage that could not be replicated in Kyiv, the editor opted for stock footage combined with CGI. Well, good enough. Good enough for government work. Ultimately, the attempt by the Russian authorities to ban the movie ended up raising the profile of the movie, and in the very classical and Russian and generally post-communist Eastern European style, the Russian people could not care less about the Kremlin's ban, and multiple cinemas did run the movie anyway and effectively told the foaming mouths of the Ministry of Culture that they can kindly and politely and with all due respect go fuck themselves. The busy apparatchiks claim that the movie is offensive, especially if launched before February the 2nd, when Russia was due to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Stalingrad. Other Putinist apologists and other idiots asserted that the depiction of Marshal Zhukov in the movie is insulting because Zhukov is portrayed as an idiot. You know, back in my days, Russian propaganda was better. Because Marshal Zhukov is actually portrayed as a hero and an enabler of justice by the end of the movie, which is also historically accurate, by the way. But he's also portrayed realistically, namely as a wholesome character, with qualities and flaws like all other humans, and as a man still bearing some mental scars, which is, again, very realistic. Zhukov in 1953 still had vivid memories of ordering people to go to certain death in the most brutal war in history against Nazi Germany. So what the Russian government is objected to is that Zhukov is not portrayed the way, ironically, the Stalinist propaganda would have wanted. Well, tough luck. Maybe the lackeys in the Russian Ministry of Culture should also be reminded that Stalin is dead. Just saying. Ultimately, if you are a political junkie, you should not miss this picture because if you know the history, you'll also be able to laugh at most of the jokes. And what surprised me in a very pleasant way, some of the jokes in the movie are indeed communist era specific. The theater I was in laughed out loud, but I doubt many of the former Western Bloc audience laughed or will laugh so loudly. Also, bonus points for the language. Unlike in The Darkest Hour, in this picture the director did not shy away from brutal language. Good! Because the Central Committee was like that. I hate it when they sanitize reality just to avoid offending the sensibilities of prudes.
Should we investigate? Should you shut the fuck up before you get us both killed?
We need change.
Well, let's see who can mobilize first. Oh, seems to be me.
Sneaky little shit.
So, with that said, I rate the picture as follows. Acting 9 out of 10. It is really good. The only qualm that I have is with Adrian McLaughlin starring as Joseph Stalin. Admittedly, part of that could be the fault of the screenwriter, but nevertheless, the depiction of Stalin, or Joseph Jugashvili, is quite weak, especially when compared to the impeccable depiction of Lavrenti Beria. They should have found someone more rusticated, shall I say? Stalin just comes off as too pompous. So yeah, 9 out of 10 for acting. Script, 8 out of 10. Quite decent. Could have been better. Historical accuracy, 9 out of 10. I have already explained why. And finally, intensity, 5 out of 10. The movie is not intense by any means. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, although it has its moments when it kinda drags on. So this rounds up to an average of 7.75, so 8 out of 10. That's my final grade for this picture. Indeed, quite good. Do try to see it. It is worth the time. I'll show you of that. So with that, what do you all think? If you have watched the movie, please do tell me in the comment section. I noticed that it was received by the public as a hit or miss, which I guess it's fair. If you're not a political junkie, or even worse, if you're one of the so-called moderates who genuinely believes there is or there can be a moderate position between telling the truth about Stalin while mocking him and being subservient to Stalin, yeah, if you're one of those people, you're probably not going to like it. But I have much higher expectations and indeed much more faith in my audience. So yeah, please do tell me how you perceived it. If you haven't seen it already, do see it because it is indeed worth it. It's not a movie that you must see in a theater, so you can also get it on Blu-ray and enjoy it at home, which is something I should have done as well, since towards the end of the film, a cigarette was obligatory. You'll see why. So with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your consistent and generous support. Do subscribe to my social media and yeah, I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.